Okay. Okay. It's 4:04. I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting of the State Allocation Board to order. For this meeting is being held in person in the auditorium of the East End Complex located at 1500 Capitol Avenue for anyone that would like to provide public comment in person. This meeting is also being conducted by way of Zoom meeting for members of the public that would like to participate remotely. In order for this meeting to run efficiently for those participating remotely, please note the following guidelines. All attendees will be muted during the meeting. If any member of the public would like to make a comment, please use the raise hand feature in the Zoom meeting interface. I will call your name at the appropriate time, and OPSC staff will request to unmute you. If you are calling into the meeting and not using a computer or the Zoom application on a mobile device, you will be unable to provide public comment. Number two, I'd like to just note that Jennifer Osborne, who's the Chief Deputy Director of the Department of General Services, has joined us today as Director Lasso's designee, and we will begin this meeting by establishing a quorum. Ms. Jones, will you please call the roll, noting any members joining us from a remote location?
Certainly. Senator Wilk?
Present.
Senator Laird? Senator Newman?
Here.
Assemblymember Murasucci? Assemblymember Davies? Assemblymember Alvarez? Juan Morales? Here. Jeremy Smith? Here. Jennifer Osborne? Here. Michelle Perrault?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. And just to note, we have one remote, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. And then just also, we do not have one remote.
Okay.
Okay, we do not. If we do have anybody join at a later date, we'll make note. So just also an additional note, there will not be a closed session at today's meeting, therefore we'll just move on into the agenda. Rebecca?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'll just note for the record that Assemblymember Davies has joined us via Zoom.
Thank you. I'd like to direct the board's attention to the minutes from the April 3rd, 2024 meeting. They're on pages 1 through 11 of today's agenda, and I request that the board approve the meeting minutes.
Make a motion.
Before I move to a motion, are there any public comments? Either in the room? No. Seeing none, I have a motion and a second. If we could please call the roll.
Senator Wilk?
Aye.
Wilk, aye. Senator Newman?
Aye.
Newman, aye. Assemblymember Davies?
Aye.
Davies, aye. Juan Morales? Aye. Morales, aye. Jennifer Osborne? Aye. Osborne, aye. Michelle Perrault?
Aye.
Perrault, aye. That motion carries.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and move on to delegation of authority. Rebecca?
Thank you. The delegation of authority is on page 12 of today's agenda. This is a resolution of the State Allocation Board regarding a delegation of authority to Michael Watanabe, Deputy Executive Officer for the Office of Public School Construction. I'd like to request that the board approve this delegation of authority.
Okay, thank you. Rebecca, I apologize for going out of order and backwards, but I do believe the secretary may have missed calling
And I just,
Mr.
I'm sorry.
Smith on
Yes.
the last.
Jeremy Smith, how do you vote on the minutes? Apologize.
Yes.
Okay, and thank you so much.
No, I wanted to make sure because we are just at quorum here and present, so.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, moving back to delegation of authority. Are there any public comments on this item in the room or online? Seeing none. Okay, all right, I have a motion by Mr. Morales. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, are there any comments or questions from the board? Okay, Secretary, if you please call the roll.
Yes, Senator Wilk?
Aye.
Wilk, aye. Senator Newman?
Aye.
Newman, aye. Assemblymember Davies?
Aye.
Davies, aye. Juan Morales? Morales, aye. Jeremy Smith? Smith, aye. Jennifer Osborne? Aye. Osborne, aye. Michelle Perrault?
Aye.
Perrault, aye.
And just noting for the record that Assemblymember Murasucci has just joined us. Thank you. We are moving now on to the next item, which is our executive officer statement. Rebecca?
Thank you, Madam Chair. At the January 24th, 2024 State Allocation Board meeting, the board directed staff to research alternative construction cost indices that could be used for the annual adjustment to the school facility program grants, and directed staff to provide updates on the status of that effort in each executive officer statement. Today's agenda does include an informational item presenting the results of that research to the board, and a comparison of construction cost indices that could be considered by the board moving forward. In the January meeting, the board also requested that the executive officer report out at each meeting on the status of a potential statewide school facilities bond. The update related to a potential statewide school facilities bond, we do, of course, still have the messaging from the governor's budget in January that the administration intended to negotiate with the legislature to reach agreement on an education facilities bond to be considered by the voters in the November 2024 election. Currently, there are two bills still pending in the legislature that would propose education facilities bonds. Pursuant to California Elections Code, the last day for a legislative measure to qualify for the November 5th, 2024 election is June 27th, 2024. And I would just note for the board's reference, we did include in the February executive officer statement a high-level overview of the three levels of developer fees and the conditions under which they can be charged by school districts. To provide an update to the board on the state budget, in April, the governor and the legislature agreed to an early action agreement to begin addressing the shortfall in the state budget. In part, the early action agreement adopted governor's budget proposals that reduced a planned general fund investment for the school facility program in 2024-25, as well as deferred a previously planned general fund investment for the California Preschool, Transitional Kindergarten, and Full Day Kindergarten Facilities Grant Program. With the release of the May revision on May 10th, the governor proposed eliminating the remaining general fund investments previously proposed for the school facility program and the Preschool, Transitional Kindergarten, Full Day Kindergarten Facilities Grant Program, indicating in the budget summary that an investment in the early education facilities program could be considered for inclusion in a bond being contemplated by the legislature. We would note the May revision did not reference OPSC's current processing rate of approximately $1.5 billion in school facility program projects annually. If our processing continues at that rate, currently authorized funding for new construction and modernization projects may be exhausted by January 2025. Our next meeting for the State Allocation Board is scheduled for Wednesday, June 26th. The time and location of that meeting will be announced at a later date. And additionally, I'd like to note that the meeting originally planned in July will be canceled.
Thank you, Rebecca. Are there any public comments on the executive officer statement? Seeing none, are there any comments from the board? Okay. Seeing none, this is not an action item, it's an information item. However, before I move on to consent, I just want to back up. I believe we need to get a roll call for Assemblymember Murasucci for the minutes and for the delegation of authority.
How do you vote, Assemblymember Murasucci, on the minutes and the delegation of authority?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on then to the consent agenda item, and I believe, Michael, you'll be presenting.
Okay, the consent agenda is on pages 15 through 120, and it's ready for your approval. If there are no questions or concerns, we also recommend the approval of the priority funding apportionments on pages 140 through 161 as well.
Okay, thank you. Are there any public comments on the consent agenda or the priority funding item? All right, seeing none. Is there any comments or questions from the board or concern about folding in the priority funding apportionment into consent? No? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion on the consent agenda with the inclusion of the action item?
So moved.
Okay, moved by Smith and seconded by Senator Wilk. Okay, great. Secretary, we call the roll, please.
Certainly. Senator Wilk?
Aye.
Wilk, aye. Senator Newman?
Aye.
Newman, aye. Assemblymember Marisucci. Marisucci, aye. Assemblymember Davies.
Aye.
Davies, aye. Juan Morales.
Aye.
Morales, aye. Jeremy Smith. Smith, aye. Jennifer Osborne.
Aye.
Osborne, aye. Michelle Peralt.
Aye.
Peralt, aye. Motion carries.
Great. We'll move right along then to the financial reports. Rebecca?
Thank you. The financial reports are on pages 121 through 139 of today's agenda. I would note the available funds are reflected as of May 29th, 2024, and have been updated with the latest May revision proposals.
Thank you. Are there any public comments on this item? Seeing none, are there any board comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, this is not an action item, just an information item. Our first action item, as noted, was taken up as part of consent. So we will keep rolling. Okay, that brings us to reports, discussions, and information items. Rebecca?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The reports, discussion, and information items are on pages 162 through 221 of today's agenda. I would like to provide an overview for the board of our construction cost indices comparisons, which has been prepared as an informational item today in response to the board's direction from the January meeting. Following the January meeting in which the board requested that staff research alternative construction cost indices that could be used for the annual adjustment to the school facility program grants, staff did meet with stakeholders on 3 occasions to identify a number of construction cost estimating companies that produce indices and information that could be considered for that purpose. Ultimately, we identified 5 construction cost indices meeting the statutory and regulatory requirements for the board's use for this purpose that could be considered. Those are from RS Means, Sierra West Group, Engineering News Record, Vermullens, and Turner Construction. Since 2015, the board has used the RS Means Construction Cost Index for the purpose of making the annual adjustment to the school facility program grant amounts. At that time, the index or staff had presented 3 potential indices for consideration because the index that had previously been used by the board was no longer available. At that time, staff presented 3 different options, and the board selected and made the annual adjustment based on the RS Means Construction Cost Index, and asked that the board return in 2016 for selection of an index to be used on a permanent basis. In 2016, the board subsequently reaffirmed its selection of RS Means as the construction cost index for this purpose, and at that point had selected it as an ongoing basis. Staff has been bringing the annual item in January to adjust the new construction and modernization per pupil grant amounts for the school facility program based on the change in the RS Means Construction Cost Index. Based on our research in this informational item, we have presented comparisons from a number of ways of looking at these 5 potential indices that could be considered. Again, noting that RS Means is the index that's been in use since 2015. The initial page that I would draw the board's attention to is stamped page 166 of your agenda. The top table on that page depicts the rate of change year over year from 2015 through 2024 for each of the 5 indices. So I'd note for the board's awareness, the year-over-year change from 2023 to 2024 was a negative 1.33% adjustment based on the RS Means Index, which the board had adopted for the change to the the change to the per pupil grant amounts in the January 2024 State Allocation Board meeting. As you can see in that table, the RS Means Index did have the smallest and the only negative year-over-year change from 2023 to 2024. However, if you look at the previous years, there were very large increases in 2021 to 2022, as well as 2022 to 2023 using that index. In those 2 years alone, representing a 25.1% increase. Each year-over-year increase is presented, as I'd said, with the 5 indices. We also present the average change across all indices and the difference from the from the average for each of the 5. The bottom table on page 166 of the agenda reflects the resulting new construction pupil grant amounts. The first column showing RS means reflects the current new construction per pupil grant amounts that are in place since the board's action in January 2024. The other columns are really illustrating for comparison purposes the hypothetical grant amounts that would be in place for new construction had the board selected one of these alternate indices back in 2015, and looking at that multi-year period from 2015 through 2024. Ultimately, I would note at a high level, RS means yielded the per pupil construction per pupil grant amounts for both new construction and modernization that were in between the other 4. So 2 would have yielded higher grant amounts and 2 would have yielded lower grant amounts in that period from 2015 through 2024. Attachment A to the item, which begins on stamped page 168, presents a table that compares the methodology and key features of each of these 5 indices for the board's consideration. It compares factors such as how many cities and which cities are used in the methodology for each index, the number of construction materials that are considered, a summary of labor and wage rates that are factored into the methodology, as well as a number of other considerations in terms of frequency of publication, estimated cost for use, and availability to the board. In conclusion, staff has presented this as an informational item. We would note at a high level a few points for the board's consideration. One is that since 2009, the board has acted to select an index that is most reflective of California costs for the purpose of making the annual change to the school facility program grant amounts. Based on our analysis and research and comparison, we do note that the RS means index still appears to be the most California-centric and reflective of California costs, in part because it uses 12 cities in California. It actually has 15 cities in California currently available compared to the other indices which use far fewer California cities and in some cases national or even national plus Canadian city data. RS means also uses more construction materials than the other indices. And across the 5 indices, we found that the average rate of change from 2015 to 2024 was 52.16%, and that RS means had the closest to the average change for that period from 2015 through 2024 of 48.30%. Our recommendation is that the board accept the report, and we're happy to address any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Rebecca. Before I go to the board, are there any public comments? All right, seeing none. Any comments or questions from the board? Okay. Seeing none, this is not an action item, and it's just an information item, correct? So there's no action taken. That brings us, I think, to the conclusion, right, of our agenda. Are there any other public comments on non-agendized? All right. Seeing none, then we're adjourned at 4:22.